Welcome back. In this lecture, you are going to learn more about your target audience. That is the audience that is the most interested in what you're selling. So we're going to be looking at their demographics. Specifically, we're going to look at which age range is the most profitable, that is, which ones are buying the most, and which gender is the most profitable for you. And with this data, we can update our target audience persona with actual data, make it even more accurate, which means that we can make our marketing even more accurate, which means that we can increase the profit of ours or someone else's business. And this is how you use data to continue improving. So let's dive in. The first thing we're going to do is move to the left and head over to reports. And then we're going to move down under user, demographics, and overview. So we have to remember, we're still practicing. This isn't our data. This is still the data from a demo account. But even just for now, let's pretend this is our data so that we can learn how to use this data when we start getting our own. So the first thing we want to do is look at our target audience persona. So we're going to move into our guidebook, move over to the My Data section, and then click on My Target Audience Persona. So for our product, which is selling blue light blocking glasses, our target audience persona is called Gamer Gary. Now the age range is going to be between 18 and 35 years old, and the gender is going to be both male and female. Now these are all assumptions, of course, created by ChatGPT. What we're going to do is look at the data we have in front of us and then update our target audience persona accordingly. So the first thing we want to do is look at the age range 18 and 35 and see, is this really true? So we have to remember, this is a demo account, this isn't our data, but for practicing purposes, we're going to pretend it is. So the first thing we're going to do is move down to where it says users, and we can see that we're skewing very heavily towards male. We can see that there's 61.4% men versus 38.6% women. Now, in our target audience persona, we're actually saying that we're targeting both genders, but just looking at this surface data here, it looks like we should be targeting men. However, remember what we have been learning about high quality versus low quality traffic? We always need to dive deeper into the data. So what we're going to do is go down and click on View Genders. And this is where it gets so interesting. So the first thing we can see is that the vast majority of our traffic is unknown. And the simple reason for that is nowadays, when you sign up to a Google account, you don't have to reveal your gender. And even so, there are so many cookie blockers, content blockers, etc. out there that it is difficult to find out what people's genders are. So unless you have a lot of data, you have to look at the actual amount of users and look for patterns. But here we have a pretty clear pattern that we have a lot more men than women. But zooming out a little bit, this is where it gets so interesting. If we look at the men and we look at their actual value, meaning how much they're actually purchasing for, moving over to the right, we can see that they have purchased and been responsible for $29.4 thousand in the last 28 days. However, women, being slightly more than half in total users, is still quite a bit more in their total amount of revenue that they are responsible for. So this is where the data starts to get really interesting, because on the surface level, it makes sense for us to update our target persona towards men. But what we're really interested in is our ideal customer, the customer that is most likely to purchase our product and services. And we can very clearly see here that that is going to be women. So as always, when you're looking at this data and you're making a decision like this, it is important that if you have more data tracking backwards, meaning a longer date range, it is valuable to look back. So I'm going to change this to 12 months, apply. And now ask the question, is the pattern still true? And we can see here that while the changes aren't just as dramatic as we just saw, it is still very clear that judging by the amount of users versus the amount of revenue generated, women are worth more. And if you need to go down to the nitty-gritty here, we can calculate this. So for example, if we want to know how much each man is worth here in revenue, what we can do is take this number, 208,221, and then we take this revenue and we divide it with their total amount of users, which for men is 52,029. And then we can see that each male traffic is worth approximately $4. So let's look at the women. We'll look at the total revenue, 180,587, and divide it with the total amount of users, 33,518, and check the results. And we can see that each woman is worth 5.3, almost $5.4. So what this means is that the most valuable gender we have traffic-wise is going to be women. And interestingly enough, we can also see that women are underrepresented versus the men coming into our website. So what I would do is that I would update my target audience persona, and I would change the gender first of all from male and female into female. And secondly of all, I would start to reconsider how can I bring in more women to my website. So right now what we have is that we're selling these glasses. The question is going to be, can I angle this website towards women? Can I make a product specifically targeted towards women? Can I try to make the product more unisex? Can I use a softer language that is more inclusive or even more directed towards women? You always have to consider, what does this data mean for my strategy? At the very least, knowing how many men that are coming in and how much more women are worth here, I would at the very least make a so-called boyfriend gift box here using these glasses where women can come into the website, purchase these glasses for their boyfriends. Now, while the partner could be any gender, of course, but looking at how many men we get to our website, but how much more valuable women are to get to our website, that might be a viable strategy to put into play and then adapt our website accordingly. And then, of course, we're going to want to have glasses targeted women specifically and see how that plays out. And then we're going to get that data, and then we can start making adjustments on that data and see where we're getting. So that is the gender. Now, of course, the two most important questions are both the gender and the age. So right now we have the age span 18 to 35. And the question is this the age where I have my target audience? Let's have a look. So we're going to go back by clicking on overview here under demographics again. And this time we're going to move all the way over to the right that it says users by age. So as we can see right now, the top representative is 25 to 34, and then we have 18 to 24. Looking here, we have 18 to 35. So it is easy to assume that, hey, this is actually looking pretty spot on. This is very accurate, but as always, we have to dive deeper into the data. So we're going to click on view age ranges. And once again, remember, right now we're looking at a 1-year perspective, and that is worth doing. Scrolling down, it is worthwhile to know that just like with the gender, the actual data isn't always clear. The vast majority is going to be in the unknown category, meaning their age is going to be hidden because they haven't said their age, they don't want to reveal their age, or they are untrackable because privacy is becoming bigger and bigger today on the internet. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. So what we're looking at, of course, is the total revenue. So what we can do right away is that we can click on this button here, and then we can see the age ranges that are making the most money, and moving over to the left. And we can see that the top performers is going to be 25 to 34 and 35 to 44. Pretty interesting. Even though the 18 to 24 age group has more users, the 35 to 44 group is making quite a bit more money. And this makes a lot of sense because in this age span, usually people don't have that much money. But in the higher age spans, and especially if your niche is correct, there is going to be more money involved. So looking at this data, even if we look further down, we can see that down here, comparing the 45 to 54 years olds, they have close to 10,000 compared to the 20,000 between 18 and 24. But even though the older ones are half in size, the young ones aren't double in revenue. So that means that even the 45 to 54 years old are more valuable than the 18 to 24. So looking at our target audience persona again, 18 to 35 isn't accurate. Yes, interest-wise, that might be accurate, but target audience-wise, the ones who are going to buy your product isn't going to be in this age span. So instead, the information that we would be using here was to understand that 25 to 34 is definitely going to be the sweet spot where you have the most users and the highest revenue being generated. So I would change this right away. Instead of 18 to 35, I would change it to 25 to 34. Now, of course, if you wanted to be more inclusive, you could do 25 to 44, but we're looking at the absolute sweet spot here, and that is 25 to 34. So what does this mean? Well, this means that we have now updated our target audience persona. And when we started out, we were looking at the age gender 18 to 35, and we were looking at a unisex targeting both men and women. But looking at the data, we could see that the actual age span would be the age 24 to 34, and the gender would be female. Very important because it allows us to change our strategy and make updates every step of the way, because you're going to talk differently in your language and in your product pages, in your emails, in your articles to a 25 to 34 years old versus someone who's going to be around 18 to 25. And I'm going to change these back now because remember, remember, this is just demo data. Now, finally, heading back to overview, the gender and the age are going to be the most valuable data that you can gather when it comes to your demographics. When you don't have enough data, you're going to have to sit back a little bit because there's going to be so much unknown data that isn't tracked. But once you start gathering up towards a couple of hundreds in the male and female, you can see the patterns of which is the most dominant, and then of course look at which is the most valuable, and that's where you find your target audience. And you make sure you update your target audience persona accordingly. Now, when it comes to interests here, these are usually very general. There's very little information to gather from it. You can go ahead and look at the language of people coming to your website, but even here you have to dive deeper. While we've seen in the location that there's a lot of people coming from China, we could also see that they didn't stay on the website at all, probably because they don't understand English or they don't understand English well. So again, when we're looking at this sort of data, we would have to go into view languages and deep dive and get a deeper understanding rather than just thinking, oh, we're doing really good with China. We aren't. We're actually doing really bad with China. However, if we translate it to Chinese, that might be an interesting idea of converting more of that traffic into actual customers. But for most of you, chances are it's going to be in your own language or in English. Amazingly well done. So in the next lecture, we are going to start looking at the different pages on our website to see which ones are performing good so we can improve them and drive even more traffic there, and which ones that are performing badly so that we can make sure that they are up to par or maybe even delete them depending on how we read the information. See you in the next lecture.